There's a mountain that I live near that I collect stones on here in Oregon. Quartz crystals, tourmaline, gold, you name it. It's an old mining area that has abandoned mine shafts and dilapidated old buildings from the 1800s. The roads up this mountain are treacherous, taking quite a while to get up if you accidentally take the wrong unmaintained roads. One day, my roommate and I decided to go collect stones up there. It was spring and the weather was great. We hadn't seen signs of other people all day. A quiet day in the national forest, as kids were still in school. We made it up the mountain and set up camp. We poked around the area, finding a few crystals here and there, and even though I had been up this mountain many times, something felt off this time. This crude camping area with its makeshift toilet was extremely remote, but I had never felt strange there before. It's as if we were being watched, that feeling you get in your subconscious that you cannot seem to shake. But I did, and we carried on with our day. At around 9 p.m., after preparing a fire and some food, we decided to head to bed. The tent was about 50 feet from the car, and that made me feel comfortable. I have hiked constantly in super extreme remote areas for many years now, and have run into some sketchy situations. It's not comforting when you are scared and hours away from a vehicle on foot. The forest can become overwhelming under those circumstances, but this time was different. We had the car right there, so what could go wrong? I had just about fallen asleep, and my roommate was already out like a light when the noise caught my attention. It sounded like the brush just in the tree line shaking. We were surrounded by forest all around except for a boulder field to the back of our tent, up against a massive mountain peak with an amazing rock face. I sat there listening to the bushes shake, wondering what could be out there. It's not unusual to have elk or small animals like opossums come into camp and walk through, but this was something big. What happened next made my blood run cold. I hear the bushes stop shaking, and something takes a step onto the ground. It had a loud step. I know that sounds strange, but that's the best way to describe it. It then proceeds to walk right up to the tent. What made me lose my cool mentally was it was on 2 legs. I could identify right away that this was not a 4-legged usual coming around camp. I laid there as still as I could and listened. All I could hear was a heavy breathing. Then it all went quiet. Again, I hear the bushes rattle, and it walks up to the tent again. The bizarre part is, I never heard it back away from the tent. That messed with my head. After a few minutes of silence had passed, I jammed my roommate in the ribs with my elbow and whispered, as uncomfortable making a noise made me feel, for him to listen. Just be quiet and listen. After a few minutes of him looking at me like I had lost my mind, the bushes shook, and the whatever it was walked up to the tent again. My roommate's eyes got big, and he whispered, "That's 2 feet." He knew how I felt by the look on my face and didn't even expect a response. We sat there for a good 20 minutes, listening to this thing walk up to the tent over and over, but never walk away. Then, whatever it was, walked over to the crude bathroom and started shaking it violently. Both of us now laying up in our sleeping bags, debating in our minds what to do next. After a good 45 minutes of all of this going on, everything got silent. So we sat there for about another 20 minutes still. Silence. That's when I turned to my roommate and said, "We need to go." I had well enough by this time. All we had for defense was a small axe in the tent with us, which, looking back, was so very foolish. I grabbed the axe and I said we're going to book it to the car, get in, and lock the doors. And we did just that. We ripped the tent zipper down and the fastest we could without getting it caught and hightailed it right for the car. My roommate turned the car on immediately and turned the headlights on, illuminating the entire camping area with our tent in front of the car. Nothing. No signs of anything in our limited visual field. My roommate then jumps out of the car, runs up, and grabs the tent with everything in it, runs back and throws it all on the back seat, and we take off down the mountain in the pitch black. The entire time, I'm expecting whatever that thing was to come running out at the car. I have not camped up in this area since a good few times. As I kid you not, it is one of the most beautiful, pristine, subalpine areas you will ever see. I've had 2 other experiences though. Both were camping in the car, as I will never sleep in a tent again. The natives used to call this area Skookum Mountain, and said it was haunted by the evil god of the woods. The miners had a rough time here. Rugged country, filled with many perils. First things first, this happened to me when I was around 10. I've lived in Idaho all my life and spent a lot of time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me camping, and my old brother and I always hike up whatever trails we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I only know as Warm River, and my brother and I were on a regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel bored through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something I'll never forget. After walking through probably 2/3 of the way, I heard a terrible screech at the end we entered through. The screech wasn't like anything I've heard before. I've heard the screams of animals on dark and windy nights. I even think I've heard Bigfoot calls a few times, but never the metallic, grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, it did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 feet in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooting me quickly to the exit of the tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should just continue walking and head back after whatever made the noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms on us, so I was pretty upset. My brother reassured me we would be fine, and we made the walk back without incident. However, I didn't get any sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screeched at us or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside the trailer. I woke my brother up a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that it was probably just other campers staying up late and enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was pretty normal. We packed up the following day and my life continued as normal. I was disconcerted but chalked what happened up as a harmless event. I must have been exaggerating in retrospect. A few weeks later, I went up to Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here, I would mess around with my cousins, our favorite activities being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghost in the Graveyard, and other games like that. On one instance, I was chosen to be the seeker for a hide and seek game because I was one of the younger cousins. I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally, all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge and the older cousins hid in the nearby trees or at the base of the nearby mountain. As I was searching near the bottom of the mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain a bit. We would always whistle as a hint at our locations. It sounded like someone was hiding way up near a tree known as the underwear tree. You can guess why. So I began trekking up towards the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I continued on, warily, and convinced myself that I would be fine. I hated walking in the night alone, but figured whoever I find would walk me back to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong, because you could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott. Come back down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking back down the path, I heard a voice call, "You almost had me." So I ran back up to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the tree and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick figure made into a human with its emaciated figure and lifeless eyes. I remember its face looked like the skin on its head was being pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw this creature, I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I ran, I was overcome by an overpowering smell, and I could hear the thing running after me. As I approached the camp, I saw a few people at the bottom of the mountain waiting for me. I was crying and shaking, and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Ever since that night, I have always felt uneasy up in those mountains. I used to be really religious and figured it was a demon of some kind trying to kill me or something like that, but those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago, the game Until Dawn became really popular, and I watched a walkthrough of it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in game, I got chills down my spine. It was exactly what I saw. I did a ton of research on them. I figure someone must have gotten snowed in at that old lodge and resorted to cannibalism. But that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time. It never occurred to me until watching Until Dawn that they might be from the same thing. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write down my story. I don't like to use the term skinwalker to describe the hellspawn that wander the Appalachian Mountains. I say this because the only people that believe in skinwalkers are the ones who have actually seen them. I sure as hell didn't believe in any such thing until about 2 weeks ago. The Appalachian Mountains had always been a place that I wanted to visit. The pictures on Google were enough for me. This place is beautiful. I had heard a few stories about skinwalkers roaming around the mountains during the night, which just made it all the more interesting. So I saved up some money, rented a cabin, and flew out there to experience the mountain lifestyle for a couple of weeks. The first few days were completely normal. I had gotten settled in and felt completely fine. Hiking some surrounding trails is all that I can recall for the first 3 or 4 days. It was on that 5th day that everything began going to crap. The cabin that I had rented had 2 big floodlights facing the backyard. Every night, a coyote would walk past my cabin, causing the lights to turn on. I thought nothing of it. It was honestly kind of cute. On the 5th night of my stay, I was sitting in the living room, watching some satellite TV. In the corner of my eye, I saw the floodlights flick on. I jumped up to go see my new coyote friend through the window. Let's just say that whatever caused my floodlights to turn on that night was not a coyote. Its body looked completely normal, except for the legs. The legs were extremely long and skinny, probably 3 times longer than any normal coyote. The thing just stared at me. My fight or flight didn't kick in. All I could do was stare back into its empty eyes. The creature then let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard, and then got even closer to the window. I turned around to grab my phone so I could call the police. As I was walking to the couch, the floodlights turned off. The soft glow of the old TV screen was the only thing lighting the living room. I grabbed my phone and sprinted upstairs to my room. My first instinct was to hide in the closet, so I did just that. The closet door had little slits in them, so I could kind of see what was going on outside. I picked up my phone and tried to call the police. There was one slight problem, though. My phone was dead. It was around this point that I heard knocking coming from my front door. The knocking continued for what felt like an hour. I literally had no idea what to do, so I just sat there, hoping that it would stop. It eventually did stop, but shortly after, I heard the door open. No kicking the door in or anything, it just opened. I started to cry. I could hear faint footsteps getting louder and faster as it went up the stairs. It eventually got to my room, where I thought I was dead for sure. I could hear it opening drawers and messing with my bed sheets. I peered through one of the slits in the door, but I couldn't really see anything. That was until the creature put its disgusting, rotting face right up against the door. It was breathing so loudly that it was hurting my ears. I pushed myself back into a corner and used one of my jackets to cover me. It was my last option. I don't know how long I sat there, but it felt like an eternity. I eventually peeked out from behind my jacket to see some light coming through the doors. I stood up and looked out. It was daytime. I couldn't hear the creature anymore. I assumed that it got spooked by the sunlight and left. I slowly opened my closet door. It was finally safe. Needless to say, I got out of there. And I'm never going back. I don't want to see a therapist because they won't believe me. They'll think I'm insane. Maybe I am insane. I don't know. All I know is that whenever the locals of the Appalachians talk about these things, they aren't lying. I grew up in a small town near the coast. For most of the year, not much happened, but during the summer, tourists would come and fill up our town's hotels. The reason? We had a really nice beach that surfers and wakeboarders loved. My best friend and I grew up there, and every summer, we would find a job in the tourist industry. Those months were when our town made a lot of money. Because of that, I never took vacations in the summer. Instead, I went on trips with my best friend after the summer, usually in the fall. We always did something together. Once we went to Mexico, and another time we hiked up to the big Hollywood sign. It was fun, but not really exciting. So we decided to try something more adventurous. Hardcore hiking and camping. My friend suggested the Appalachian Mountains. He said the nature there was beautiful, with mountains to explore. I looked up some pictures and was immediately sold. It looked amazing, exactly what we wanted. We worked during the summer and saved enough money for camping, gear, transportation, and food. The first few days of our trip were fantastic. We hiked through forests, hills, and mountains. It was a really beautiful place. Every night, we built a campfire, talked about old memories. But on the fifth night, something went wrong. My friend brought up our music classes from when we were kids. Our teacher didn't like us much, and we would always laugh in class. She would get mad at us for not properly singing a song that she had written herself. It was a very bad song. I asked my friend, "What was that song again? How did it go?" After a moment, he remembered and started whistling a melody that I instantly recognized. We laughed again, kept talking, and went to bed. That night, both of us had an extremely restless sleep, as we were constantly disturbed by strange noises, high-pitched screeches that kept us awake. Though it made us quite nervous, a friend who often goes camping had warned us that when camping in the wilderness, one can hear strange sounds from various animals like mountain lions, birds, and deer. With no experience in hunting or tracking animals, we couldn't determine the exact type of animal, but we thought it resembled the growl of a mountain lion. We decided it would be best to distance ourselves from that place, and started a long hike away from our last camping location. As we walked for hours, our conversations gradually faded, and the only sounds that reached my ears were the rustling of leaves beneath our footsteps and the sound of the forest. Suddenly, at the end of the trail, a figure stood before us. Though quite far, we could unmistakably make out the presence of a person. The encounter made us slightly uneasy, considering how remote we were from towns and cities. We cautiously continued walking towards the person, uncertain about what to expect. The distance between us gradually closed as both parties approached each other. The closer we got, the more our nervousness grew. We greeted him, but he kept walking to us in silence. Finally, at a distance of approximately 10 feet, the person, an elderly Native American man, stopped and locked eyes with me. An awkward silence ensued, and then he spoke, asking, "What are you doing here?" We explained that we were camping and hiking through the mountains, sharing details of our trip and how long we had been in the area. However, as we spoke, the man's expression shifted, displaying growing concern. "They have noticed your presence," he uttered. Confused, I asked, "Who has?" He gazed at me, shaking his head in disappointment. Then he insisted that we accompany him, revealing that he was staying nearby. He suggested that it would be best if we set up our tents next to his house for the night. He assured us that he had food to share, and the man appeared friendly and trustworthy. Sensing that this could make for an interesting story, we agreed to his offer. As we walked towards his house, I couldn't shake the curiosity about who "they" referred to. I asked the man for an explanation, but he simply replied, "We do not talk about it." Of course, this response did nothing to ease my mind. After a short walk, we arrived at the house, a small wooden structure barely noticeable to passerby. In front, there was a charming garden with a variety of herbs and plants. We were invited inside and offered some tea as the sun began to set. While the man was outside, I exchanged a knowing glance with my friend. We both shared a look that said, "What in the world is happening?" A mixture of excitement and adventure. Despite our insecurity, the man's friendliness made us feel secure. As we discussed our thoughts, we heard him talking outside. It wasn't in English, nor was he conversing with anyone visible. Intrigued, we peered through the window and saw him scatter handfuls of gravel or herbs around his house. We couldn't quite make out what it was. When he returned inside, there was a sense of relief on his face. He sat back down at the table with us and proceeded to caution us about venturing into this part of the forest. It wasn't safe for us, he warned. We assumed he was referring to the mountain lions we had heard earlier. While we set up our tents, the man stood at the edge of the garden, gazing into the darkness. We secured our tents and settled down for sleep. The sun had barely risen when the man woke us up. He urged us to begin retracing our steps, ensuring that we walked as far as possible before nightfall. He expressed his desire to join us if he were capable, but his age limited his ability to travel long distances. We bid him farewell and started walking. Just as I turned around, he grabbed my arm. My friend did not notice, as he was already walking. He looked me in the eye and pointed towards my friend, saying, "They don't like him. Keep a close eye on him and stay silent at night. If you hear sounds, don't go after them." I nodded in understanding, assuring him that I would protect my friend from any mountain lions. The man's expressions shifted to one of utter surprise, as if I still hadn't grasped his true meaning. There are no mountain lions here. Now go. He directed me towards the trail where my friend stood, finally noticing my conversation with the man. I shared with my friend what the man had said, but even though he didn't explain the meaning behind "they," we were clearly very nervous and we had grown tired of this camping trip. Following the man's advice, we resolved to walk as far as possible before nightfall. We set up our tents, did not light a fire, and we kept our voices to a minimum. Exhausted from a long day of walking, we managed to sleep well. However, the following day as the sun began to rise, I emerged from my tent and noticed something very strange. There stood a vertical stick firmly planted in the ground, decorated with beads and paint and wrapped with rope. At the top of the stick, there was a blackened section, not painted, but burned. Clearly not something we had left behind. At this point, all kinds of thoughts raced through my mind. How had we not noticed it when we set up our tents? Had the old man followed us here? Approaching my friend's tent, I asked if he was awake, to which he responded that he was. However, he appeared pale and sickly. Annoyed, he questioned why I was attempting to open his tent in the middle of the night, asking if I was scared. I assured him I remained in my own tent throughout the night, both of us overwhelmed by a sense of unease. I informed him about the mysterious stick near our tents. As unsettled as we had been the day before, we decided to swiftly pack up our tent once again and walk as quickly as we could before nightfall. At this stage of our journey, any enjoyment had disappeared entirely. Our sole focus was to escape the forest as soon as possible. Stricken with a creeping sensation and feeling unwell, we walked onwards relentlessly. As night fell, we cautiously put up our tents, not making any noise, not making a fire. However, this time I could not sleep at all. The notion that someone had followed us previously and might be lurking nearby made me too anxious to rest. Deep into the night, my sleeplessness persisted. Then I heard an unusual sound. A heavy, labored breathing, like the kind of an extremely sick person struggling for air. Suddenly, I recognized the tune, melody, and sound. It was my music teacher's self-composed song being whistled. Irritated with my friend, I couldn't understand why he would be fooling around in such a moment. My anger compelled me to unzip my tent and peer outside. My friend's tent was situated to the left of mine, but the whistle wasn't originating from that side. Instead, it emanated from the right. The realization struck me instantly, recalling the old man's words. I was not going to look or follow the sound. I promptly retreated into my tent, determined to remain as silent as possible. Clearly, having not slept at all, morning arrived. My friend was still feeling very ill, but he persevered. We dismantled our camp and resumed walking. After a while, an unsettling sensation of being watched overwhelmed me. It was an uncomfortable feeling, so I asked my friend if he felt the same. As I turned to look at him, I could see from his expression that he did. It was at that moment the reason behind our unease became apparent. The sounds we had been hearing for days, the footsteps and the sound of the forest, had ceased, leaving only the echo of our own footsteps. The forest had fallen into complete silence. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, no whispering wind, nothing. Then we caught a smell. It was a very strong and gross kind of smell. It was unlike anything I had ever smelled, utterly dreadful. Pressing forward, we soon stumbled upon a lifeless deer hanging from a tree. We didn't linger to discuss what happened to it, though. I noticed its mangled and limbless state, untouched by predators. We continued walking tirelessly, finally arriving at the forest's edge just before nightfall. Entering the first town on our path, we felt a sense of safety wash over us. Seeking refuge, we stepped into a diner, craving a hot meal and some coffee. The waitress, observing our worn-out conditions, asked about our well-being. "It looks like you've seen a ghost," she remarked. We proceeded to recount our experiences in the woods. As she absorbed our words, her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. She resolved to fetch the cook from the kitchen, leaving us perplexed as to why. Emerging from the kitchen, a Native American man approached us. He had a very concerned expression. "So, you emerged from the forest, huh? And you've witnessed strange things?" he asked. We confirmed his question. He explained that the woods harbored dark spirits, normally keeping in the shadows. However, they could be agitated or provoked, especially by whistling. A grave mistake, according to him. He advised us never to speak of these encounters again and to leave the spirits as they had now left us. Me and my friend never camped or hiked again. I still have nightmares about my experience in the Appalachian Mountains. I still don't know if we, two inexperienced campers, were scared about very explainable things, or if there really were paranormal entities in those woods with us. We agreed to never speak of it again, as we had discussed with the cook of the diner. Nevertheless, I felt compelled to tell my story. If you venture into the woods, ensure you know your path, and, above all, never, ever whistle at night.